So we're seeing a lot of governments, for example, even within Australia, right? There's an analyst named Steve Hodgkins at Ovum who talks about how the country is potentially adopting a cloud last policy. And that's actually very dangerous when you think about it, because these revolutions tend to be a one-way street. All of a sudden, if process trumps outcomes, you're not going to be able to compete, and you're not going to be able to prosper and succeed. What it does is it doesn't necessarily act in the interest of citizens, right? It preserves the status quo, it's easy, and it's in the interest of government bureaucrats, rather than saying, well, how are our citizens living their lives? What is it that they need access to on a real-time basis? And asking much simpler questions, which is that if I can go online and make a reservation to anywhere on the world on most airlines, why is it that when I deal with my government, I have to wait in a physical line, hold on the phone, or submit a 3-part paper form? And I think what we're seeing is this gap in technology in the consumer web versus government services. And what's dangerous about that in terms of having these types of policies is that it looks at precedent and it looks at history and it holds on to it as part of a glorious past, when in fact the only truism about technology is that it's part of a much larger continuum with constant change. And it's very Darwinian in its nature, where you have winners and losers. And what you want to do is you want to be able to adapt to what's going on around the world. I think the Australian government has a huge opportunity, right? I think the question shouldn't be, are you spending enough money or not enough money on IT? I think the question should be, what are you doing to simplify citizens' interaction with their government, and how are you doing it for cheaper? Because you're not going to live infinitely in a climate where IT budgets continue to rise. In 1995, if you went to any government, and for that matter, any multinational corporation, there are 3 things going on. One was there was a raging debate, do you or do you not launch a website? And most people would say, well, we put all this information out there in the public domain. What about resources? We've got to hire somebody that knows HTML. What if we spell words the wrong way? Who's going to be held accountable? And there was the same debate around email. People said, well, how are we going to store all this information? What if we put everything in writing? What does this really mean? And who's going to manage the system? And the third thing was customer self-service. People didn't trust customers to actually ask and fulfill their own orders online. They said, well, you need somebody to pick up the phone, a call center, we need to verify they want what they actually said they want. But you look back at that and you almost laugh, right? I remember in the United States, it actually took the Vice President of the United States to mandate that every federal government agency have a website. But when you look back at history, we look at that period and it seems like comical. Those countries and corporations and NGOs that drag their feet are either going to face extinction if you're in the corporate world, or you're not going to be able to compete in the global economy as effectively as those countries that actually embrace this third wave of computing. There's this false premise that somehow if you hold the infrastructure that it's more secure. From my experience, what we saw was these 2,094 data centers, and frankly, when we were counting them, some agencies didn't even know where those data centers were. The old model of security was very much around building a fence or a perimeter around your systems. That model is broken, it's not sustainable. What we realized was that actually these public cloud companies were providing transparency in terms of their security, but on top of that, they were hiring the best security experts around the world. And on top of that, that was their core business. When you go to agencies that are focused on whether it's environmental protection or health, their core business is in IT. Right? And what a lot of these agencies ended up doing is they started pretending like IT was their core business, and they're not hiring the best and brightest in the field. And on top of that, you had a proliferation of infrastructure where they frankly were not able to keep up. And so it was a very easy decision when you started being intellectually honest about what are your current security practices versus, companies that actually focus on this as a core competency.